impossible to be explained.
Okay.
So when somebody says naturalism can't explain this, it's like saying evolution doesn't explain the origins of life. Well, okay, maybe that's beyond it. Now, I realize that naturalism is a more broad and explanation, but actually a better analogy would be saying that, well, science hasn't explained X yet. Okay, so what? That doesn't mean that science can't explain it. It doesn't mean that it's beyond explanation. That is a big kind of argument from ignorance of, you can't explain this using your methodology, therefore we're justified in positing supernatural explanations. No, you're not. There are no more. It's back. You could use this argument for anything. Going back to the lightning bolts I was talking about before. Once upon a time, those people with a naturalistic worldview had no explanation for lightning bolts, and people then felt that they were justified in positing supernatural explanations. They were not justified. They were wrong, and eventually we found an explanation. Now, we may never find an explanation for some things, but I find that a lot of the objections that people launch against this, like I was talking in the last call, and you may look up the discussion or debate that I had with Matt Slick on this show about the transcendental argument for the existence of God, because the logical absolutes and things like that are what tend to come up in these discussions. Oh, naturalism can't explain this. Actually, yeah, I'm pretty sure that you're making some kind of category error there, because the nature of the logical absolutes are such that they don't exist as things that need an explanation. They are simply true. They are, you know, the thing we went round and round about is Matt tried to say that everything is either physical or conceptual. And I was saying that no, that's not a true dichotomy. There are things like the absolutes that are neither. And he wasn't accepting that answer because I couldn't put a name on the category. And one of the potential names that I should have come up with was right there in his argument, and that is transcendent or transcendental according to the definitions we were using. The simpler thing is that these things are simply true. Their value that we build on, the laws of identity, non-contradiction, and excluded middle, are things that we build on to create the structure of thought and reasoning. But they don't exist as things. They didn't come into being with the universe. They didn't come into being because of a thought. They're simply true. And so people tend to say, naturalism can't explain that. So what? The fact that you don't have an explanation doesn't make some other explanation true.
Yeah, that's definitely where to hang your hat is you know, it's an argument from incredulity, right, or argument from ignorance. So that's where a good place to stop, because you can get these logical things you can get wrapped around pretty easily by the theists, especially ones like Matt Slick, who kind of know all rhetorical tricks and these sorts of things. So, you know, it's their burden of proof to say, hey, you know, where did these things come from and how did they come about, and you know, the fact that they're there is not necessarily a proof of God. So I hope that helps, Ian.
Yeah, the response that I gave was that, well, first of all, they're assuming that the default state of the universe is that truth is not absolute or truth is subjective or something like that. And the second thing they're assuming is that if God existed, that would somehow change that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
These are big assumptions, both of them. Yeah.
Because when you start talking about, you know, objective reality, objective truth, things like that, you're probably on murky ground, and you're probably dealing with somebody that's saying, you don't have an answer for this, and I do think that I have an answer for this, therefore mine is more viable and your entire worldview is crap. And that's, I mean, it's almost something that I think is so asinine we shouldn't even have to respond to it. Unfortunately, as we saw with Hal and others who have convinced themselves that they're open-minded, that they are investigating using principles that are rational, when they hear something that confirms or is consistent with what they already believe to be true, they latch onto it, and it becomes an oh duh moment. And I did the same thing. I had, and I've talked about this before, I had an oh duh moment that was probably one of the stupidest things I've ever done. And that was, I asked a member of my family who was, from my view, somebody who was wise and intelligent and a good Christian who made good arguments. And I was asking, how do I argue with an atheist? And he said, oh, well, you just have to ask them where their morals come from, because they can't possibly have any objective source for morals. And I said, I mean, I had an oh duh moment. Like, of course. That's, how did I not see that before? It's so obvious. And then I went out and used it. And boy, am I glad I did.
You got smacked around, probably.
Yeah, I was. The difference, of course, being that once somebody made a demonstration of why that was one of the stupidest things anybody could say, I went, oh, yeah, how could I have been that dumb? There's something different about, there's some presupposition, some protective shell, some compartmentalization, and it's probably different for most people. There's not going to be one answer or one argument that solves it for everybody, but we make mistakes. And boy, do we tend to latch onto things. I mean, you know, I used to glibly point out, you know, to some callers that of the two of them, I'm the only one that's demonstrated he could actually change his mind. You know, they're calling in to preach the things that I used to believe, and I changed my mind, and here's why I changed it. Can you give a refutation for the reasons that I changed it? And no, of course they can't, because their beliefs are based on faith or personal experience or interpretation, etc. Yeah, I like what you're doing, and I think you're on the right track.
Yeah, and that absolute morals thing was one of the other four things the guy said, and that was actually the easiest one to refute. So. Yeah.
All right. Well, we're closing in on out of time, so I got to let you go so I can get to at least one more caller.
All right.
Thank you for your call.
Thanks, Ian.
Bye.
I think he said bye.
I think he said bye too. We've got Aaron in Austin.
Yes.
Hey, thanks for waiting.
Thanks. Hey, I've got a question for y'all about Bible prophecy, the end times, and nuclear apocalypse.
Okay.
Basically, I'm wondering what y'all's views are on it. I've heard this prophet guy in Austin here on the local channel speak that Abilene, his hometown, that he's one of these prophets that is supposed to live through the end times, and that's where he's coming across. And he's basically saying that a third of the population of Earth will be killed off, you know, from nuclear apocalypse and stuff like that. Just doesn't sound very heartening to me.
Go ahead.
I don't see any difference between this guy and the guy that stands on the street corner with a sandwich board saying the end is nigh.
Yeah.
I mean, there have been doomsayers all over the place.
It's not remarkable that somebody can read something into the Bible and make money off of it, or turn it into a ministry of some sort. You know, that people have been doing that all along.
And have that holier than a holier than thou view. You know,
Yeah.
that kind of pissed me off.
The thing is, you know, people will make claims like this all the time. Whether or not there's anything valid behind them remains to be seen. They need to actually demonstrate with evidence. And one of the claims is that these people tend to get credence from is that, well, I'm not getting rich. I'm out here doing this because I believe it sincerely and blah blah blah. I believe that they're doing it, and I believe that they're doing it because they believe it sincerely. But don't think for a second that they're not getting rich. They might not have a penny in their pocket like me,
Yeah.
but they're getting rich because there are more things that they get out of this than just pennies and dollars.
I mean, that's not
and
something
that is
you really,
attention
as a
and
kid,
credibility.
you look and say,
And
one day I'm
I
gonna
gotta stop you
prophesy
because
that
we're
the
out of
world-
time. I gotta stop you because we're out of time.
We're sorry.
There's the crew. Show thyselves. There they are.
Okay.
Thanks everybody for tuning in. Well, there will be no show next week or the following week. There's a studio conflict next week, and the following week that's the 4th of July
Atheism
weekend.
withdrawal.
So it's 3 weeks until we're back on again. I apologize. I meant to mention that earlier. I'm sure the chat room's going crazy now. So, you know, find a
Sorry.
pine cone and have a good week.